Hey, everybody. I am so glad you're here tonight to join me on episode number 7 of my YouTube journey. Some personal stuff to get out of the way before we get started tonight. In my last video, I mentioned that my son and his wife were expecting our first grandchild, and he was born on Thursday, a week ago today. And he is an amazing little buddy. He is perfect. I can tell he's smarter than your average child, and I'm pretty sure he's the best looking little dude I've ever seen. But other than that, I'm not being biased at all, but his name is Oakley, and I can't wait to share my life with him and watch him grow up and attend ball games and go to school plays and all the things that we're going to do together, go to Disney World. So all those things, can't wait. And my wife has been on cloud 9 now for a week, and she just kind of glows. So we're both really fired up about it. My son and daughter-in-law are in love as well. My daughter-in-law is doing really well. So and Oakley's very healthy. So if I can figure it out, I'll share a picture right here over my shoulder. I'm not very technically gifted, I guess you could say. So if it's not there, I couldn't figure it out because I want to share a picture. So this week's episode is about a pre-war player named Charles Albert Bender, better known as Chief Bender. He played for the Philadelphia Athletics, was a big game pitcher. Honestly, when I was a kid, I grew up going to the library at school and checking out books of baseball history. I'd do Hank Aaron. I loved Hank Aaron books, actually. I guess when I was a kid was in the mid-'70s. He had, just broke the record or was close to it. And so there was a lot of stuff going on about him. So I guess that probably piqued my interest, and there was probably some newer books out. But I'd read the old time books, and they talk about Babe Ruth, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle. One of my favorite books, actually, and I've looked it up on eBay and tried to find it. I can't find it, but it was called "I Was a Big League Bat Boy," and I thought that was so cool. It was this guy. He was a bat boy with the St. Louis Cardinals in the late '60s, and he had all these pictures of him in the clubhouse and with Bob Gibson and all the stars of that team, and talked about what it was like to be in the dugout in the clubhouse and being at the games and different bats they had given him and all this other stuff. So it was really cool when my first cousin, I've mentioned this before, was the bench coach for the Minnesota Twins under Ron Gardenhire. He was there 14 years or something. And we would go down to spring training when our kids were little, and we did it 3 or 4 years in a row. And we would get to go in the dugout for batting practice and things like that. It was really cool getting up close and personal with the players, and they would stop and talk to us and have a conversation and sign a baseball for my kids and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, my son got to be the bat boy when he was 14 in a game versus the Baltimore Orioles. And I think it meant more to me than it did to him just because of that book I read when I was little. Anyways, back to where we were going with this. I tend to go off on a tangent. Chief Bender. Oh, he was an amazing pitcher back in those days, but I didn't really know anything about him because he weren't in any of those books. So when I first got into that pre-war era, I wanted a Cracker Jack card. And there was one for sale. I can't remember. I think it was REA. And it was 1914. It was authentic altered. And somebody had altered that bad boy. I'll show you in a minute. About 100 years ago. They didn't do it to improve it. I don't even know what happened to it. So, it's not in the greatest shape, but I like the image of it. And his hat, he had that pillbox hat like the Pirates wore in 79 and 80. And it's just a cool looking card. And so it was cheaper because it was altered. So I got it. And so after I got it, it's something I do on every card I buy, even if it's one I've seen my entire life but never owned it. When it comes in the mail or I buy it at a show, as soon as I get home, I read the back of it because the back matters. And it's not just the front. And I feel like if I don't read the back, I'm not doing justice to the card because the card is important. the front of the card to me is the image of the card, but the back of the card is the soul of the card. And so I owe it to that card and I owe it to that player to read about their story. So I read the back of that card and I was blown away. I didn't know he was called Chief because he was an Indian. And I had no idea. I know the old time guys are looking at me like, dude, are you stupid? I mean, how was I going to know that? He's not a well talked about guy. So I read the back and got intrigued by him, and I bought another card of his. And then somebody told me there was a book about him called Chief Bender's Burden. And I picked that book up and read it, and I was blown away. What an awesome story. A guy, just like today's ball players. We got guys from Dominican. We got guys from America. We got guys from the East Coast, West Coast, South, North, all that with different accents and different backgrounds. We got one of the biggest stars in the game from Japan. I mean, so it's a worldwide game. But back then, it really wasn't. But you had these different cultures colliding. Unfortunately, and we'll get in more of this another day, but with some other player runs, but the whole not letting the person of color play baseball, just look, I grew up in the deep South. I'm in the middle of Tennessee, and I don't understand the prejudice that happened back then. It doesn't make sense to me. I didn't grow up around that. I know racism is still around, so before I get some stuff like that, that's a very unfortunate part of human beings. But the not allowing people to play because of their color. But what I don't understand is they let people with Indian backgrounds play. So I don't understand that the background, don't really care. But he still faced prejudice. He still was called names. He was yelled at and told to go back to the reservation in the middle of the games and faced a lot of kind of stuff like that. So anyways, the story's awesome. He was born in 1884 in northern Minnesota in Crow Wing County on basically an Indian reservation. His parents had been gifted by the American government 160 acres to farm. It's cold up there. I'm sure you could grow crops, but you couldn't grow everything you could like in the southern part of America. But his mother was an American Indian. She was from the I wrote it down. I don't want to mess this up. Ojibwe. I looked up how to say it. Ojibwe tribe. And she was full-blooded Indian, and she couldn't speak hardly any English. But his dad was a white man, and he was born, we think, in Maine or Massachusetts. They're not really sure. And he had moved to Minnesota, and he was one of the first white men to go to northern Minnesota. And he was a logger, and he was a trapper, and a fisherman. And so you can imagine what kind of dude that guy was. I mean, you talk about being tough. To go up there and to live, basically, there were no towns or cities up there. He's out in the middle of the wilderness. So he befriended a lot of Indians. He learned to speak the native language that she would have spoke. And they ended up getting together. And she had, we're not really sure, anywhere from 11 to 14 children. And they lived in poverty. And so what would happen back then, and granted, now in 1884, we're 8 years removed from Custer's last stand. Okay, so that's where we are in American history. So that's when Charles Chief Bender was born. So when he was 7 years old, recruiters would come around to Indian Territory and try to get children to come to their government-funded schools. So when he was 7, he was taken to a train stop with a bag lunch. He had his older brother with him and his sister. I think she was older as well. And they were put on a train to Philadelphia to a school called the Lincoln Academy. And I guess it was like Lincoln Academy for Indians. And he was sent there when he was 7 years old. The only thing he really remembers about it was seeing the big bright light coming at him on the train station stand there, and he ran and hid in some crops or some weeds. And it took them a little while to find him and get him on that train because he was scared to leave. I can imagine. 7 years old. When his parents put him on that train, they weren't sure they would ever see him again. But they thought that was his best chance of survival. And so they put him on a train. He goes off to this school when he's 7. And the great thing about it was he was educated. The bad thing about it was, being an Indian boy, one of their goals was to educate you in a way of the white man and to strip you of all your heritage. You weren't allowed in art class to draw Indian art stuff. You weren't allowed to sing any of your tribal songs that maybe you learned. You had to cut your hair. You had to dress in a way that you didn't look like an Indian. So he lost all his Indian culture, and he was purposely kept from his family because they didn't want that to trickle back into his life. They were trying to take that out. They didn't want to have any kind of backsliding. So he wasn't allowed to see his parents. 7 years old. He ages out at 12. They put him and his brother on a train, and he makes his way back from Philadelphia to Minnesota, of all places, and gets back home. And while he's there, his dad's a rough dude. One day, his dad, he wasn't home long. His dad told him and his brother to run down to the creek and get some fresh water and some pails. And apparently he didn't run fast enough because his dad stuck his boot right in his rear end and knocked him flat on his face. And so imagine you're this kid that's been away from your parents. You get home, you think, man, my dad's gonna be glad to see me. And then this happens. And so there's probably some other instances too, but that's the one he remembers. They lived in a small home with dirt floors, and it was just really, really poverty. And by now, there's more mouths to feed. So he's hungry. At least at school, he got 3 square meals a day and had a bed to sleep in. So he kicks him on the ground. Him and his brother get up and run to the creek to get the water. And when they get down there, discuss it amongst themselves, decide, we're running away. So they take off. They run away. They go a couple of miles down the road, end up finding work at a farm. And basically, it's like the prodigal son in the Bible. They're living even below where they were with their parents. Well, another set of Indian school recruiters come through. And they're trying to find Indian kids that want to go to their school. And he immediately, I want to go. And he knew that was his best bet. So he gets on a train. They take him to Virginia to the Carlisle School of Indians. If you think you've heard of that before, that's where Jim Thorpe went after he had left. Jim Thorpe came through, who some people think one of the greatest athletes of all time, and he played football there. And somebody I saw it on a YouTube thing has his football sweater with the big C on it. There's no telling what that's worth, but anyhow. He goes there, gets a great education again, and while he's there, he plays 4 sports. Track, basketball, I don't know if it's basketball, but I know he played track, football, and baseball. And he was tall, skinny, lanky kid. And it's weird how people that you have heard of cross paths, and that happened to him. He crossed paths, I can't even speak, with a guy named Pop Warner. Yeah, that's right, Pop Warner, of the football legend. The one that invented different parts of American football. He was the football coach, and he was the baseball coach there at Carlisle. So he played baseball for him and played football for him. Pop Warner was the one that taught him, they called it a fadeaway pitch, but his changeup. And had a big influence on his life. Pop Warner kind of took him under his wing, and as Chief Bender got older and got 17, 18 years old, he showed a lot of promise. And so Pop Warner would try to pull some strings. He got him into Dickinson College for a little while to pitch, and he ages out of the Carlisle School when he's like 18 years old. He goes to Dickinson for a little while, but ultimately hooks up with this club called Harrison. Or Harrisburg, can't remember, it's one of those, athletic club, and he pitches for them. While doing that, the Cubs come through. He plays against the Cubs, who had a really fantastic team at the time, and he has a great game. Connie Mack was there scouting the game and sees this kid. He lets him finish the season, and they sign him. They bring him on. He's kind of rough around the edges, but he ends up being one of the best pickups Connie Mack ever had. While he's there, he, some people say, invents the slider. He's the first major league player that the way the pitch spun and what it did action-wise, it was a slider. And so, a lot of people call the slider the bender. And I don't know whether it comes from that or just the fact it bends. But yeah, he was one of the inventors of that. He pitched on a staff with Eddie Plank. Eddie Collins was in the infield. He had Frank Baker in the infield, home run Baker, and they started off having a dynasty. So they won, what was it? I wrote it down right here. They won 4 World Series, 1910, 1911, 1913, 1914. And he started the first game of all those. Connie Mack went on to say that he was the coolest guy under pressure. When you read the book, Tom Swift's book, Chief Bender's Burden, pick it up. It's awesome. When you read it, they start talking about it, Ty Cobb said that he was one of the craftiest pitchers he ever faced. And when you start reading about his change of pace, him locating pitches, him reading batters and the way they stood in the box, he was a brainiac on the mound. And what I started, my last video, I told you Ty Cobb, when I read about him, was all about, it was dead up Michael Jordan and his want and need to win and be the best at everything. Chief Bender was Greg Maddux. That's who, when I was reading, I was thinking, he's Greg Maddux. He's the professor. But he did it in 1910, 1914. In 1915, now in 1914, he had a pretty good season. But if you look at his stats, he was protected a little bit. They pitched him mainly against lower level teams. And so his contract was up. They were kind of leaving it up in the air whether they were going to put him on waivers. He took that to mean they weren't going to re-sign him. So that was when the Federal League came about, and he jumped to the Baltimore Terrapins in 1915. Had a terrible year, absolutely horrible. The Terrapins wanted to ship him out, said he wasn't in shape and all this other stuff. And so he ends up coming back to Philadelphia, pitched for the Phillies for 2 years, knocked around a little bit, and then retired. He finishes up his career as a coach, player manager at the end. He was a college coach and then was a scout. And unfortunately passed away in 1953 and was voted into the Hall of Fame that year. So great player, crazy story. He put up with all kinds of yells. And if he had a great game, the newspaper people would say Bender scalps the tigers. It would be that kind of stuff all the time. He'd appear in a cartoon form with a headdress on and a tomahawk. So he always had to live up to that caricature. However, unlike Shoeless Joe Jackson, I always compare things. Shoeless Joe is my favorite. But unlike Shoeless Joe, who showed up with the Philadelphia A's and was uneducated, couldn't fit in with the college guys, Bender had no problem at all. He fit right in. He had friends on the team. He got along. So really interesting character in the game. Baseball is all about characters, and especially in that pre-war era. Even in the 70s, you had Vukovich and Louis Tiant with his big old mustache and the way he spun around. Unfortunately, we just lost him. So still characters, but he was one of them. Check him out if you haven't already. I don't have as many of his cards. I do some other player runs, but they're really cool cards. So I'm going to show those. I'm going to show some of the original photos like I did with Cobb. People really loved that in their comments, so I thought I'd do it again with Chief Bender. So hang with me. We'll show those cards and those photos and be right back. All right, first thing I want to show having to do with Chief Bender. If you have watched my Babe Ruth episode, I hope you have, because that, out of all the episodes I've done, that's the one I'm the proudest of. And actually, this is crazy, but it's the one I've got the fewest views of, so it's kind of wild. But this is the Babe Ruth ball that I talk about and share a little bit about why I wanted it in my collection, how it, I felt like it had to do with one of my children, and it's an amazing Babe Ruth autograph with the blue ink. And but anyways, one of the things that kind of all came together was the fact Chief Bender's on it. And I've just shared with you like how it was just happenstance that I got into Chief Bender. And when I saw this ball and it was calling to me for several reasons, I mean, obviously one of the reasons is who doesn't want a Babe Ruth ball in their collection? And one that amazing doesn't come along that often, and the story behind it is freaking awesome. So out of all the Babe Ruth balls in this world, this is the one I'd want because of the story. And I'm not going to tell you the story. You're going to have to go watch my episode. That's what we call a hook in the business. I'm not in the business, but I think that's what they call it. So anyways, this is the ball. But the fact that it had Bender on there was one more thing that was just kind of fate for me. They kind of told me this ball was supposed to be mine because of all the pre-war guys that could have been on here with Ruth. It happened to be the one obscure guy, and he's not obscure at all. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. But in my mind, in my, small baseball history, he was the guy that I didn't know that much about, and just happened to stumble upon him, read his book, got some of his cards, and then he's the dude on the ball. Now, single signed balls are worth much more than ones that have dual signatures or team signatures. And I guess because you just want a ball with them on it. I don't know, but him being on there saved me some money. And like I said, I think it's cool that one of the guys that I really like is on this ball with Ruth. So there you have it. That's the Babe Ruth Chief Bender autograph. He put Chief. If you see a lot of his old time signatures, he always put Chief in quotes. So to me, that tells me he wasn't that bitter over people calling him a name that had to do with his heritage. So he just took it all in stride, and I guess wore it with some pride. Because, honestly, he got to be known as just this smart pitcher, one of the smartest pitchers of all time. And, when you got people like Ty Cobb saying that, that's a pretty big deal. And so he kind of took it and ran with it, and was a really good dude to represent his Indian heritage. So that's it. So we're about to look at some cards and some Type 1 photos. I'm going to put him back on his roost right there and take off my white glove and be right back. All right, back. Here we go. Let's look at some cards. The first card, I've shown this before in my Cracker Jack episode, but it is let me get this light. That is not good. It is the 1914 Chief Bender, and you can see where it's been trimmed, especially along the top, and then it's kind of jacked up down here on the corner. But it's a beautiful card. It really attracted me, like I said, the hat and the look on his face, and you can see the top of the A. It says Bender, Philadelphia Americans. Now, the 1914 and the 1915 cards, like I said in my video, are very similar. The difference being, one of the huge differences is when you flip over the 1915s, the back is upside down, so you have to flip it this way to read it. So it's 14. It doesn't say anything about mail-in because they were all in boxes of Cracker Jacks. And so I know this was a 14. The other thing with the Bender, all of the main cards, there's more cards in the 15. They added some cards at the end of the set for the 15 run. But all the cards that are in the 14s are in the 15s, except two cards, the Del Pratt and the Christy Mathewson changed their picture on the front. But Chief Bender, he changed teams. So in 14, he's playing for Philadelphia, like I just mentioned, and pitched in the World Series. And in 15, he was pitching for the Baltimore Terrapins. So down here it says, instead of Philadelphia Americans, it says Baltimore Federals. So they did change that, but he kept the same image. It still had the A on his chest. They didn't even try to change that. But this is his Cracker Jack card. Pretty cool card. And so like I did in the Cobb, this is the original photograph. I'm gonna lay it down so you can see the whole thing. And it was by Francis P. Burke. He's the same guy that did the Ty Cobb image that's on the Cracker Jack card. And he was out of Chicago. And so here's the image. And this image, a lot of times I didn't do the back, but a lot of times these original Type 1 photos will have a stamp on the back, or in the case of the Cobb Cracker Jack card, it has a sticker on it down here. This one didn't have enough to really tell who took the picture. And so someone was able to find and had a postcard that Burke and Atwell was the company, and they had put out with the whole team of the Philadelphia Athletics on it. And they had where they printed it. It was printed on Fifth Avenue in Chicago, Illinois. But in this photograph, you can see Charles Chief Bender right here. It's the same image that I just showed you, the one that's on the Cracker Jack. You can also see Eddie Plank's Cracker Jack image. And then this one right here is Home Run Baker. And let's see, I'm sorry, that's Eddie Collins. Where's the Home Run Baker image? There it is. That's the one that's on the Cracker Jack. And so anyways, there's several Hall of Famers on this picture right here. And of course, Connie Mack right in the middle, and that's his Cracker Jack image. So all of these were their images that were on the Cracker Jack, but because they put this on there, they knew they took that as well. So that's how they knew it was a Francis P. Burke or Burke and Atwell photograph. So it's pretty interesting. Put this up there with that. Scoot it over a little bit. And then the next one is, I picked this one up because I really like the card, but also it's one of those backs. It's a little rare, but it's a T206, and it's the Cycle 350 back. Let me focus in on it a little better. And it's really pretty. This one's got the trees in the back, and then there's one that doesn't have the trees in the back, but they're both the same image. It says Bender Philadelphia Americans on it. This one, you know, it's got the rounded corners, which I don't mind in the T206 cards. It's centered though, and so it wore evenly, which I think honestly is really cool looking for a card this age. But there's that cycle back that's pretty cool. You know, the Piedmonts and some of the other ones are a little bit more plentiful, but this one, I don't know what the pop count is. I didn't look that up, but it's not important. It's just really kind of a cool card. So that's it. I don't know why my phone is not wanting to focus. So I use my phone as a camera. Like I said, I'm not very high tech. Now on that card, this image right here is what we think that card was made off of. So it's another famous image, and it's not one. There we go, focused. So it's been tweaked a little bit, which they would do, but you can tell they aimed his head up a little bit, or they could have had a completely different image, but it's just very similar. You can see his back pocket on this one, whereas you don't with this one. So, but it looks very similar, but you could see how they would take an image like this. There's also this image that is very similar too, but it's a different hat. This is a card image. I can't remember exactly which one, but they've got the full body pose on it. So anyways, they like those old cameras did not take good action pictures, and they were working with big glass plate negatives. They didn't have like today where you could take 1,000 frames in a second. They had to get it right, or they had to throw that whole glass negative away, and trying to catch an action pose where it wasn't blurry was really difficult. So like the Shoeless Joe Jackson poses where he has finished his swing, he's in that funky looking fall through, they had him do that and hold it so that they could take a picture they could guarantee wasn't blurry. And they would do the same thing with pictures they would have them hold their pose and with their follow through, and they knew they'd get a good picture that way. So that's that one. And then the next card is, and this one's raw, bought it raw. I wanted to see what one felt like. It's the Sporting Life series or set, and it's the blue. And it says Bender Philadelphia Americans on it. And it's a great card. Now this one has some creasing issues and that, but good card though. It's got the back. This was glued in an album at one time. It's got like some residue from some green glue or something on the back side, and it got some paper damage, but I'll get it graded at some point. But just wanted to see what one felt like in my hand. There's just something about holding a card in your hand. And so that's that one. The next one is another T206, and it is the Piedmont portrait with the green background. So classic pose, Carl Horner image, just like the Ty Cobb portraits and a lot of them. And if you notice, it's the same portrait on both cards. Now, on this one, they took the A off his chest. On this one, they left it there, but they kind of modified it a little bit to get it in the picture. How do I know that? I'm about to show you the original photograph. But as we talked about with the Ty Cobb video, Carl Horner considered himself a European photographer, and he did only pictures inside of a studio, and he liked to mess with his lighting. And so he would light up half their face and leave shadow on the other half. And in his mind, it made them look heroic. And so this is something that he got from Rembrandt, of all people, in the paintings he would do, portraits. And so this is what he did. And very classic portrait poses. And so I'm about to show you the actual picture. And here it is. This is the original Carl Horner photograph, and you can see the A's really large. Got the old wool uniform on, and you can see how the person, the artist who did this and put some color on it, how he manipulated that A, which they would do that all the time. But that's the photograph right there. Pretty cool. So unlike a lot of the other player runs I'm going to show you, I don't have a lot of his yet. This is all I have, so it's kind of, sorry about that. But I wanted to share with you his story and who he was as a player, and pick up some of his stuff. Pick up the book, Chief Bender's Burden by Tom Swift. It's really good. It's worth the read, and I think you'll learn something about this man and what all it took for him to get to the major leagues. So that's it, and thank you for watching this week. Next week I'll have a new video. I already kind of know what it's going to be too, so I hope you enjoy it as well. Thank you.